Hey dude, did you know that Minecraft is technically a Metroidvania? No? What do- Bad takes? How dare they? They didn't even get to hear the full take and they're judging me for it? Unbelievable. These people clearly don't understand genres as well as I do. I guess it falls to me then to enlighten these fools. So, genres. What are they? Why are they so confusing? How do they taste? Slightly chewy, metaphysical taste with a hint of internal struggle. Oh wait, I was supposed to do the taste test after I talked. What are genres? Well, they are categories of games grouped by similarity, specifically similarity in design elements or feel, so that you can understand what a game will be like by hearing its genres. So if I tell you a game is a Metroidvania RPG, you can understand what I mean with genres being confusing. Or you might just think I'm insane. But listen, I got put in here for other reasons, alright? So, why are they confusing? It all comes down to definition, which is a really important part of a genre. After all, it's supposed to outline what it includes and what it excludes. The problem is, some genres are a lot tougher to define than others, and those are the ones I will be looking at to try and explain their oddities for science, and not at all to prove I'm right and you are wrong. So let's start with something nice and simple. Soulslike. Weird, someone misspelled it. It's Soulslike, not Soulsborn, dummy. No, Soulsborn is a different genre. What? Yes, Soulsborn, which are defined as Soulslikes by FromSoft. No, Jerry, you made this up. There's no way this is a real thing. Oh my god, it's a real thing. Why? Is it because calling Dark Souls a Souls-like feels dumb? But it's not like Metroid has its own genre called Metroidborn. Yeah, it's dumb that you are basically saying this game is similar to itself, but it's fine. It's not a good enough reason to give them their own genre, or subgenre. Or maybe is it because the FromSoft Souls-likes are the best, or feel special or something? But just because they're great doesn't mean they need their own genre. I don't get it. Okay, I figured it out. It isn't a real genre. It's a psyop by the Souls gatekeepers to have more things to gatekeep. Frankly, it's the only explanation that makes sense. I mean, anything else would be extremely confusing, since there's no other genres for one company specifically in their games. Since, you know, that's kind of antithetical to the whole point of genres. Oh, I just realized in my shock at the insanity of the second part of the definition, I neglected to talk about the first. Soulslikes. I'm sure the definition for those can't be worse than this. Oh, wow, it actually wasn't. You know, when I say that stuff, usually I'm wrong, but yeah, this isn't as bad. But it's still not crystal clear. The definition is a difficult, action-oriented game with specific save points and exploration, which is a lot better than Think by Company. But it does still have some problems, like this. Difficult is not a word you would want to see in what is supposed to be a objective definition, since it's a very subjective thing. For example, Nintendogs is a hard game, but you might think that it isn't since it's made for 4-year-olds. But that wouldn't mean it's not difficult, it would mean you are wrong. And vice versa, Dark Souls 3 is easy, but you might foolishly think it's actually difficult. And this back and forth is kinda problematic for a definition. So difficult can be interpreted in two other ways. Either difficult as in very reliant on player skill and requiring the player to improve said skills before being able to succeed, or something more specific to the boss fight difficulty, like memorizing attacks and when to punish and such. And out of the two, I suppose the first might be a little too generic, and the second is relatively specific, but I think it works. Although, it does still feel like it's missing something. Like, this is all true, but I don't know, it feels like there's an important element that's hard to really describe that's missing. I mean, I suppose it is right in the name, so it shouldn't be surprising that the final element is being kinda like Dark Souls, which is so nebulous it has rained down and infected your local water supply. However, it's sort of the nature of a genre named after one specific game to have this vague necessary likeness. And to prove my point, let's talk about Metroidvanias, a genre that wasn't named after one specific game, but instead it's the horrendous gene splicing combination of two, Metroid and Castlevania. They were spliced together to create the genre because they actually have a lot in common. Big maps with lots to explore, with areas locked off until you receive some upgrade to allow you to access them. Progression through said upgrades. Extremely hot gay protagonists. 2D platforming. Though, the main thing we are interested in is that progression aspect, as that is the defining aspect of Metroidvanias. Having established that, let's check out the definition. Alright, now this is real confusing. And believe it or not, this is a more specific definition, because the even more generic one is... And that would include, let me run the numbers. Oh, yeah, 100% of games. So let's stick with the slightly, and I do mean slightly, more specific one. So why is it a problem? Well, I would say the problematic parts are this one, and all of this. But let's go one at a time. So, progression. Why is that problematic? Well, progression in and of itself is something that every game has in a million different ways. But even if you are more specific with the kinds of progression that's relevant for Metroidvanias, like getting progressive upgrades or progressive tools or progressive abilities, still doesn't restrict the field enough to include only Metroidvanias. And that is because exploration is another really vague concept, since anything can be considered exploring. Even the most linear of games still has exploration, even if only slightly. And then all it needs is anything that requires a certain upgrade or power-up or anything. And boom, technically a Metroidvania. Even if you restrict the field for both progression and exploration by limiting it to more open games with backtracking, it still has plenty of inclusions that if brought up will get you kicked out of the party. Like Minecraft with the elytra or pickaxe levels technically being power-ups and restrictions on your exploration that require progressive abilities. Or even ignoring the more admittedly stretched conclusions, there are some that you don't have to be insane, at least smart, to figure out. Like the Souls games with the specific items required to access new areas. Or literally all the Legend of Zelda games previous to Breath of the Wild, which feature progressive power-ups as a major aspect of the games. But when I said that they are Metroidvanias by definition, they set up this pyre to burn the witch. I might have also said that I didn't like Ocarina of Time, so maybe the pyre is for that. So, what's the solution to all this confusion? Well, quite like Soulslikes, though for Metroidvanias this is even more relevant, the similarity to the namesake aspect is what brings the definition together. By relying on a certain structure and vibe, Metroidvanias manage to exclude 99% of games in existence from the genre. That way, if you look up Metroidvania, you know what you will find. And that's really like 90% of the point of genres. Well, you know, this talk made me really want to play some Minecraft, but I will look at the genres before I do, just for fun. RPG? That can't be right. Let me check Factorio. No. What does RPG even mean anymore? There's being vague, then there's being very vague, and then there's RPGs, which are one of the oldest genres in gaming and have slowly been transformed into games with numbers in them. Yeah. But to understand that definition, we have to see how it got to this point. Starting at the basics, RPG is an acronym that stands for role-playing game. Now, if we interpret this as its definition, it would include every single game in existence, since role-playing just means acting as someone else, and there are no games where you are personally directly involved. At least to my knowledge. So we are going to need a better definition, one based on the classic RPGs, like Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and Arcanum, to name the ones I know but haven't played. Those were games that basically took tabletop RPGs and converted them into video games, and so they were characterized and thus defined by role-playing, character creation, spending 6 hours fighting a single rat as your DM forces you to take into account the weight and exact aerodynamic resistance of your dagger, only to then catch scurvy because you didn't state that you ate enough vitamin C that day. And finally, items and damage numbers with turn-based combat, which is a pretty specific definition and describes those games pretty well. However, like many older games, RPGs had an accessibility problem of killing anyone who tried to play them that didn't have a turbo nerd degree. Something I didn't have a problem with, but it probably had an impact on sales. So RPGs were sandpapered to remove a lot of the rough edges and create a more approachable experience, one that doesn't instantly kill you. With this gradual change into not instant death came a new definition: games with exploration and quests with some sort of skill system or way to level up, as well as some roleplay. This definition isn't bad, but it is a lot more vague than the previous, probably as a result of the increased accessibility. But other than meaning that my $100,000 Turbo Nerd degree is worthless, there's nothing really that wrong with this new definition. And then John Live Service realized that people liked the big numbers and loot that RPGs had, and said, "We have numbers in our game, let's add loot too." And so looter-shooter live service games were created, which were RPGs because they had the builds and loot of RPGs, and usually little else. And with that, the definition became extremely vague and has only gotten more and more vague until reaching the numbers in games definition. Which means if a game has damage numbers, or stats, or loot, it's an RPG. I mean, at this point you can get rid of the RP part in the name and just call the genre G. But I suppose one positive of having such a generic definition is that it allows for subgenres to really be what distinguishes a game from another. I mean, this way, even though RPG is kinda meaningless as a genre, the subgenres can take its place and allow people to find games that are of a certain type. For example, I love Grim Dawn, and so I would love to play some more games like that. So let's see here. Its subgenre is ARPG. Let me filter for that. What? Did it glitch or something? Let me try it again. This doesn't make any sense. How could a subgenre not restrict the search field? What does ARPG mean? Let me see. Action RPG? Oh, I see what happened here. Action RPGs are supposedly games that are like Diablo and Grim Dawn and whatever. So top-down, loot, and combat focused, etc, etc. Problem is, the name doesn't really communicate that it's a quite specific kind of RPG, so people made the pretty reasonable assumption that the definition of the genre named Action RPG is RPGs with action, which happens to be like 80% of them. So the subgenre that was supposed to be more specific ended up being just as unspecific as the main genre. All because it had a relatively simple name that led people astray. But I suppose that's less a problem with definition and more a problem with the name. But just in case you thought RPGs and ARPGs were the worst it got, let me introduce you to a genre with both a problem with definition and a problem with names, both being too specific and too vague, both having no subgenre and having too many. Roguelikes, which I already covered the history of in a previous video, and in said video I do talk about how confusing of a genre they can be, but I don't go into that much detail since it would have derailed the entire video. But this train was derailed the instant I started talking about ARPGs, so there's nothing stopping me now. So, what's so wrong with roguelikes as a genre? Well, let's start with the most glaring issue. You remember what I said about Soulslikes and Metroidvanias? I sure hope so, because that would mean you're paying attention. And since you're paying attention, why don't you subscribe to the channel and like and comment? So let's take what I said about genres named after a specific game/series and try to apply it to roguelikes. So this is a roguelike, and now let's see how does it compare to the OG, the game with the name Rogue. How is that supposed to be like that at all? Yes, that's correct. Roguelikes are named roguelikes because it's a cool name. Modern roguelikes have very little to do with rogue. The only thing that connects them are the randomization and permadeath element, but really that's about it. So, how does the definition of roguelike fare without the similarity factor? Well, this is where we encounter the paradox that is the roguelike definition. Depending on who you ask, you will get an answer that is either way too specific or one that is really vague. But since the more specific one came first, let's talk about that one first. It's all based on the Berlin interpretation of 2008, which makes it sound really official and formal, but really it was just a bunch of nerds at a convention deciding what makes a game like Rogue and distilling it into 9 points. The first two are both still very relevant, since they are the game having randomized maps and permadeath, and that is still a core part of the roguelike identity. Oh wait, I misread it. It's not a core part, it's the core part, which isn't very promising for the next 7 points. Like for example, it has to be turn-based and grid-based. And that doesn't mean pixel art grid-based, it means ASCII art grid-based. So you can imagine how many games fit that parameter. And while there are turn-based roguelikes, I would say that the majority of them are in real time. Then the next one is something that I feel has been largely phased out of most games. That being non-modality, which in human terms means always being able to do everything, even if it makes no sense contextually. Like trying to cook using your bow with rat meat on an enemy. The game should let you do this because otherwise it might be too straightforward. And speaking of complexity, that's the next point, or rather the reason for complexity, which is buzzword. Oh wait, no, this definition is before it was a buzzword. Well, basically emergent gameplay is just a game letting you do whatever you want to solve problems, which is usually some combination of insanity and violence. And while it might not be absent in modern roguelikes, they aren't even close to the level of freedom this definition is talking about. Similarly, while resource management is a part of modern roguelikes, it's pretty different from the kind of resource management that this definition describes, since it's a lot less important and usually functions differently due to the absence of inventory management. And finally, we have the last 2 points, which are true, but I feel have become very optional with more and more roguelikes that experiment with the genre. Those being exploration of maps and a hack and slash action focus, which are a part of a lot of roguelikes, but they don't really fit in with the modern definition since it's not a hard requirement. The Berlin interpretation is old and has quite clearly aged a lot. So what's the modern definition, since the old official definition is definitely not up to par? Well, yeah, it's just random elements plus permadeath, depending on your definition of permadeath. Random elements is quite simple. It just means enough randomization that each run is different from the other in a meaningful way. Permadeath is where another complication arises. The evil twin of roguelikes, roguelites. Originally, roguelites were everything that didn't follow most of the Berlin interpretation's requirements. But since that is most roguelikes, the definition has changed into, and I quote, might have missed an A or two, but yeah, there isn't a particularly agreed upon definition of roguelites. However, the most popular one is where the weirdness with permadeath comes in. Permadeath means being killed or defeated will lose you all progress and force you to restart. A good example are hardcore modes in RPGs, where death means starting from scratch and having to redo and re-unlock everything. And this is where the definition of permadeath for roguelikes gets a little weird, since losing all your progress and having to restart can be quite frustrating. Most, and by most I mean like 99% of roguelikes, have elements of progression that persist through deaths. Unlocking items in Isaac, or new abilities in Risk of Rain, or the Mirror of Night in Hades. The point of these systems is to reduce the frustration that comes from losing a run and having to restart, by letting you progress even when you fail. It's a smart system, especially since it also helps with pacing the power and complexity of what you have access to, which is why it's so common. So then you might understand why the definition of roguelites is pretty odd in this context. Roguelikes with meta progression describes about 99% of roguelikes, which makes no sense since it's supposed to be a subgenre. However, meta progression in this definition isn't supposed to be just generic meta progression, but rather meta progression that makes the game easier, with the main example being things like the Hades Mirror of Night. So what's the percentage of roguelikes where meta progression makes the game easier? Yeah. Even with this restriction, you aren't really eliminating much. The Hades Mirror of Night is a good example because it very obviously is going to make the game easier by giving you more health or dashes or lives. Those are things that are clearly going to decrease the difficulty. But unlocking new items in Isaac or new skills in Risk of Rain, or really unlocking anything new in a roguelike, will pretty much always make things easier. Both because you're getting more options and because the things you unlock will be stronger for the sake of balance. So then what's left for roguelites? Well, the final interpretation of the definition is meta progression, but strictly targeted at specifically the Dead Cells / Hades-esque permanent upgrades. And it could maybe be restrictive enough to work, but it simply isn't a strong enough difference to have a roguelite feel different from a roguelike. Instead, it's different because of a technicality which only makes things more confusing. So if even this definition doesn't work for roguelites, what is their definition? Well, I have found the perfect answer to this problem. Throwing roguelites into the sun. They are just pointless and make an already confusing genre even more confusing. So how are you supposed to know if a game is a roguelike or an RPG or a Metroidvania or a Soulslike if the definitions are all this messed up? Well, I suppose even without definitions, it's more about what a game feels like rather than specific parameters. So I guess that the real definition for all these genres is more based on a gut feeling / vibes. And so worrying about the specific definition is only for the insane lunatics that need to be locked away. Wait, wasn't I supposed to prove the opposite of that? Otherwise... Man, 6 consecutive death sentences feels a bit excessive. I will get myself out of this mess somehow, don't worry. And while not worrying, please subscribe, like, and comment to show support for my ideas to help prove my sanity.